My buddy Lee Spieckerman is back with us. We always get great buzz on every time Lee is on because he takes unconventional positions.
President Trump is exactly right on the trade issue. The establishment Republicans like Paul Ryan are dead wrong.
I don't think he's going far enough yet. I think we need a 15% tariff on all imported goods. Leo, when people talk about tariffs being a tax, that's true. But as Ronald Reagan said, when you tax something, you get less of it. We have a huge fiscal crisis coming in this country, massive government deficits going forward. We have to get that revenue. Yes, we have to cut some spending, but that isn't going to be enough. We have got to raise revenue. I would rather tax imports and get less of those, which means more American jobs and more domestic investment, rather than raising income taxes again, which the Democrats want to do.
I think the president should declare our trade deficit situation a national economic emergency. That would give him all of the license that he needs to impose whatever tariffs are necessary. We have got to get that yawning trade gap down. It is a catastrophe for our economy. If we had a reasonable tariff regime, a 15% tariff on all imported goods, that would encourage more domestic savings, more investment, and of course more buying American, which we need. Our nearly $800 billion goods trade deficit is costing us 3.5 to 4 million jobs a year, and our workers being undercut from foreign imports and from offshoring of plants owned by Americans has caused a downward wage vortex in this country. That's why middle-class incomes have not improved. They've stagnated or actually gone down in real terms over the past 20 years, and that's why President Trump was elected in large measure.
You know, at the end of World War II, we had a very high tariff. Even after World War II, we lowered it dramatically to help our allies rebuild after the war. And now we're way past that. And so we need the jobs, we need the revenue. There's no other way we're going to be able to raise the revenue that we need over the next 10 years unless we have a dramatic increase in income taxes or a politically impossible cut in entitlement programs and even discretionary spending. This is crucial for the revenue, and a 15% tariff by historic standards is very little, but it would yield $3 trillion in revenue for our government.
That's enough to make all of the middle income tax cuts in the Trump tax relief that was just passed permanent, so they don't expire. Okay. It's enough to fund a repeal and replace of Obamacare. It's enough to seed an infrastructure bank and to keep us from having $1 trillion deficit.
Right now, with Germany, we have nearly a $70 billion goods trade deficit. And then they underspend on defense by another $40 billion. So basically, American taxpayers and American workers are giving Germany and Merkel a gift of $100 billion a year. Our friends and allies in NATO and the EU have been bleeding America dry in terms of underspending on defense, causing us to have to spend at least $100 billion a year more to make up the difference, and at the same time conducting trade policies that are costing us $150 billion a year and millions of American jobs. They are bleeding us dry, and they're bankrupting the fulcrum of the Western Alliance. NATO is the greatest alliance in human history, and the United States saying that we want other rich countries like Germany to pay their fair share, which by the way is still considerably less as a percentage of GDP than the U.S., strengthens that alliance. It doesn't weaken it. Of course they're going to squeal like pigs. They've done very well by this system. What I call the hose America and expect America to like it paradigm. That isn't going to happen anymore. President Trump isn't going to allow that. It's time that our NATO allies, led by Germany, began operating in a realistic and a sustainable fashion, and that is what's going to strengthen this alliance. And we cannot counter Russia or any other threat around the world unless all of these countries pull their weight. That does have to include trade, because right now, Neil, our country is borrowing or selling valuable American assets to the tune of $500 billion a year just to offset our trade deficit. We have a hell of a lot more leverage with China than we're currently using. I'm in favor of a 15% tariff on all imported goods, but for China, until this North Korean situation is resolved, it should be 40%. We have these establishment economists and these clueless politicians who are waxing poetic about free trade, but you notice they never talk about that $800 billion deficit. They don't talk about the nearly 4 million well-paying American jobs that's costing us. If we can just knock $200 billion, 25% off of our goods trade deficit, that would add a full percentage point to our GDP. Remember, growth is the goal, and people forget, and again, these wonderful economists who love to rhapsodize about free trade don't tell us that every dollar that we spend on imports is subtracted from our GDP. So right now, nearly 4% of our GDP growth is hacked away every year by this by our trade deficit. We have an $800 billion goods trade deficit, a $550 billion overall deficit when you take out services. The other thing we hear a lot about is how wonderful services are. Well, that's great. The trouble is services do not entail nearly as many well-paying middle-class jobs as does manufacturing.
No, you're right about that.
Do you know who the #1 car exporter in America is? BMW. BMW exports more vehicles than any other company. So guess what? They can do a lot more of that. As you know, Toyota and Mazda are building a $1.6 billion plant in the U.S. There's nothing wrong, obviously, with building things in the U.S. We just need policies that make that more attractive. We have the one import that we have a significant tariff on is light trucks, pickup trucks, 25% tariff. Guess what? That is the fulcrum of the American automobile industry. And Toyota makes its trucks here in Texas and Houston. The average non-managerial employee at Walmart makes $14 an hour. The average factory worker in the United States makes $24 an hour, $20,000 a year difference, and that is a direct result of our ridiculous trade deals. Unfortunately, we're becoming a nation of cashiers, waiters, and baristas. Nothing wrong with any of those jobs.
Right.
Unfortunately, they pay about $12 to $15 an hour.
You want to see higher pay.
24.
You want to see higher pay.
I sure do.
Yeah,
That's crucial. It's not just the dollar flows and the stuff Wall Street worries about. We've got the people that voted for Trump want jobs. They want well-paying jobs. They're starting to come back. Let's finish the job by having a tariff and going back to what our country's had most of its history, which is a trade tariff.
Thank you.
We need to repatriate the American supply chain, and we need to bring those jobs for the components back here. $800 billion trade deficit, 3.5 million jobs. We need that, and we also need the revenue from a trade tariff to make the middle income tax cuts permanent.
We have to make a patriotic pitch then to say to them, this is well worth the sacrifice here. Do you think Americans are willing and ready to do that?
I don't just think it, I know it. It's backed up by polling. A leading Republican pollster, Terrence,
saying you're going to go on a diet and going on a diet is very different. You don't have to worry about these things. I cannot tell you the number of diets I've committed to do and not done. Telling the Americans, or Americans telling you that they are willing to absorb this punishment and then absorbing it are two different things, my friend.
Well, let me tell you, first of all, the entire tariff will not be passed on to Americans because importers will compress margins and find other ways to cut costs. It's a brutally competitive world economy. That's number one. Number two, no one ever talks about the other side of the equation. We're going to have millions of Americans with either better paying jobs or better incomes because this importing and offshoring orgy that we've had over the past decades has imploded American middle class incomes. Obviously, when you can access workers overseas making $6 a day, that's going to hurt American workers. More companies can build here in the United States. They're already doing it, as you pointed out in the previous segment. They can do a lot more of it. There is no reason for large-scale manufacturing imports in this country, and we need a tariff to advance that process to make our economy stronger. That is a national security issue. That is the only way we're going to be able to afford funding our military and be able to stand up to foreign enemies.
I love you to death, Lee. I love you to death. I love you to death, and especially when you use words like orgy when we're talking about trade. But be careful what you wish for. I'm telling you, be careful what you wish for because
I wish for higher incomes and better American jobs.
We'll see you, Mr. Schmatty Pants. Very good seeing you again, Lee. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend. All right, just a little kidding back and forth there, but I know I'm going to hear from people, and I'm vulnerable this week, but you're still doing it.